Ah, I see you've returned. Or perhaps this is your first time joining me. In either case, I must remind you, brilliance requires consistency, and the best way to ensure you never miss a case is to subscribe. Yes, subscribe. It's a simple action, but ensures you remain part of every twist and turn. And of course, if you appreciate the deductions you're about to witness, a like is always a most welcome gesture. Now then, the game is afoot. Let us proceed. It was a damp evening in November. I had resigned myself to an evening of violin practice when a frantic knock at the door disrupted my solitude. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a young woman, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She clutched a small object wrapped in cloth. "Mr. Holmes," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You must help me. My father is dead, and the police refuse to believe it's anything but an accident." I gestured for her to sit, noting the faint scent of lavender on her coat and the telltale ink stains on her fingers. "Calm yourself, miss." "Eleanor Fitch," she replied. "My father was Horace Fitch, the clockmaker." "Ah, the esteemed horologist of Fleet Street," I said, recalling the man's reputation. "What makes you suspect foul play?" Eleanor hesitated before unwrapping the cloth. Inside was a pocket watch, intricately crafted, yet its face was shattered, and the hands pointed to 317. "This was found in his hand," she explained. "It's not one of his creations, but something about it feels wrong." I took the watch, examining it closely. 'Neath the shattered glass, faint etchings were visible along the rim. I fetched my magnifying lens and scrutinized the markings. They were numbers, arranged in a sequence: 7, 3, 2, 9. "Where was your father found?" I asked, my mind already racing. "In his workshop," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "The police said he must have fallen from the ladder while adjusting the grandfather clock. But I know my father. He was meticulous. He wouldn't make such a mistake." Watson entered just then, his eyebrows raised at the scene. "Another case, Holmes?" "Indeed," I said, rising. "Watson, grab your coat. We're going to Fleet Street." We arrived at the dimly lit workshop on Fleet Street. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of oil and sawdust. Horace Fitch's workspace was a labyrinth of gears, tools, and clocks in various stages of completion. At its center stood a towering grandfather clock, its pendulum swinging with a rhythmic, almost hypnotic motion. Eleanor hesitated at the doorway, her hands trembling. "This is where they found him," she whispered. I scanned the room. The ladder, now upright, leaned against the grandfather clock. On the floor lay a smear of grease and a faint scuff mark. A sign of a struggle, perhaps? Watson crouched by the ladder, inspecting the base. "Holmes, look here. The rung is cracked, but it's not recent. The edges are worn as though it was tampered with weeks ago." "Precisely," I muttered, bending closer to examine the clock. My fingers traced the edges of the back panel, which was slightly ajar. "Miss Fitch, did your father often work on this clock?" Eleanor nodded. "It was one of his oldest pieces. He was fond of it, said it had secrets even he hadn't fully unraveled." "Secrets, indeed," I murmured. With a swift motion, I opened the back panel. Inside, nestled among the mechanisms, was a velvet pouch. I pulled it free and untied the string, revealing a stack of documents and another pocket watch. This watch was pristine, its hands frozen at 7:32. Beneath the glass, an engraving read, "To Horace, with respect, CB." Charles Brinton, Eleanor whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Your father's former partner, I confirmed. It seems their past dealings were not as buried as you thought. Watson, these documents, what do they reveal? Watson's face darkened as he skimmed the papers. Financial records. But these aren't just business transactions. They're payouts. Hush money from Brinton to Horace. Sums, recurring every month. Eleanor clutched the edge of the workbench. But why? What was my father hiding? I stood, my gaze fixed on the grandfather clock. The answer lies within this very room. Tell me, Miss Fitch, did your father ever mention a secret compartment within this clock? She shook her head. I reached for the pendulum, noticing faint scratches on the wood behind it. Pressing a hidden latch, a concealed drawer slid open at the clock's base. Inside was a small leather-bound journal and a revolver, its chamber empty save for one bullet. The journal's pages were filled with entries, detailing Horace's growing paranoia and his suspicions of Brinton. One entry stood out. I discovered the truth about Brinton's dealings. He is a thief and a fraud. Secured the evidence here. If something happens to me, the clock will tell the tale. Watson frowned. A cryptic clue, Holmes. What does he mean? The clock will tell the tale. I turned the journal over, noting a faint indentation on the leather cover. Aligning it with the shattered pocket watch, the sequence 7329 became clear. The coordinates, I muttered. They point to a specific time, 7:32, and the 9th chime of the clock. I adjusted the hands of the grandfather clock to 7:32 and wound the mechanism. The room filled with a low, resonant ticking, followed by 9 deep chimes. On the 9th strike, a hidden compartment within the clock face popped open, revealing a bundle of yellowed letters. Watson unfolded one, his eyes widening. These are confessions. Letters from Brinton admitting to forgery, embezzlement, and even threats against Horace. Eleanor gasped. He killed my father to silence him. Not directly, I corrected, but he ensured the ladder was sabotaged, knowing Horace would eventually fall victim to his own workspace. As Brinton was taken into custody, Eleanor lingered by the clock. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. At least now, I know the truth. Do you? I asked, studying her carefully. Eleanor froze. What do you mean? I gestured to the grandfather clock. The grease on the floor, the scuff marks. They tell a different story. Brinton sabotaged the ladder, yes, but it wasn't the ladder that killed your father. The pendulum was tampered with, deliberately unbalanced to strike with lethal force. Her eyes widened. You think? I stepped closer. The watch in your father's hand. Not one of his creations, you said, but something about it felt wrong. That watch was your message, wasn't it? You wanted me to find the truth. Your truth. But you underestimated my eye for detail. Eleanor's facade crumbled. I only wanted to protect his legacy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He was going to expose everything and ruin us both. I couldn't let that happen. Watson stared in disbelief. Holmes, you're saying she... Yes, Watson, I interrupted. Miss Fitch ensured her father's silence. And now, she must face justice. As Eleanor was escorted away, Watson shook his head. A tragic case, Holmes. But justice has been served. I glanced at the clock, its pendulum now still. Indeed, Watson. But remember, even the finest timepieces hide imperfections beneath their polished surfaces. The same can be said of men and their legacies. And with that, the case of the whispering clock was closed, leaving behind a legacy as intricate and layered as the gears of a timepiece.